Penniless and shivering in the late September rain, Penelope Foster clutched her tattered shawl around her shoulders as she stood on the depot platform in Willow Creek, Montana Territory, 1878. The journey west had stripped her of everything but the clothes on her back and the crumpled letter promising marriage to a man she'd never met. She'd fled Boston with dreams of a fresh start, only to arrive with empty pockets and a desperate heart. The train whistle echoed across the dusty frontier town as Penelope gathered her courage. She was 22 years old and completely alone, having lost her parents to influenza the previous winter. With the family home sold to pay debts, becoming a mail-order bride had seemed her only option. Now, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. "Miss Foster?" A stern-faced man approached, his expensive suit and polished boots marking him as someone of means. "I'm Harold Wilkins. We've corresponded." Penelope attempted a smile despite her exhaustion. "Yes, Mr. Wilkins. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Harold's eyes swept over her bedraggled appearance, his expression hardening with each passing second. "Where are your belongings, Miss Foster? Your letters mentioned a proper trousseau. There was a robbery on the train," she explained, her voice barely audible above the station's bustle. "3 men with bandanas. They took everything from our car." "I was fortunate they didn't." "Fortunate?" Harold interrupted. "You arrive with nothing but the clothes on your back and call that fortunate? This is unacceptable." Penelope felt her cheeks burn with shame. "I understand it's disappointing, Mr. Wilkins. If you could advance me a small sum, I could work to repay. I advertise for a bride of means who could contribute to my household," Harold said coldly. "Not a charity case. I'm afraid our arrangement is terminated." "Please," Penelope whispered, panic rising in her chest. "I have nowhere to go." Harold adjusted his hat. "That's not my concern. Good day, Miss Foster." As he walked away, Penelope stood frozen in disbelief. The last of her hopes vanished with each of his retreating footsteps. The rain fell harder, soaking through her thin dress as the few remaining passengers dispersed, leaving her alone on the platform. "Madam? You're getting drenched standing there." Penelope turned to find a tall man watching her from beneath the depot's overhang. His face was partially shadowed by a well-worn cowboy hat, but she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30. His shoulders were broad beneath a leather vest, and he leaned casually against a wooden post. "I'm fine," she lied, blinking back tears. "No offense, madam, but you look about as fine as a drowned cat." He stepped forward, extending a hand. "Preston Thorne. I run the Circle T ranch outside town." Penelope hesitated before accepting his handshake. "Penelope Foster. You're the woman who came to marry Harold Wilkins," Preston said. It wasn't a question. Humiliation washed over her. "News travels fast. Small town." Preston shrugged. "And I was dropping off some mail when your train arrived. Couldn't help overhearing." "Then you know I've been rejected." Penelope lifted her chin. "I don't need your pity, Mr. Thorne." "Good, because I ain't offering any." His voice was matter-of-fact, but not unkind. "What I am offering is a hot meal and a place to dry off while you figure out your next move. My sister runs the boarding house in town." Penelope's pride warred with her practical nature. The rain was turning to sleet, and night would fall soon. "I can't pay you." Preston's expression softened slightly. "I'm not asking for payment. Just seems the Christian thing to do." After a moment's consideration, Penelope nodded. What choice did she have? Preston led her to a sturdy wagon parked nearby, helping her onto the seat before climbing up beside her. He draped a wool blanket around her shoulders without comment and snapped the reins. The horses moved forward, and Willow Creek began to reveal itself through the misty rain. The town was larger than Penelope had expected, with a main street lined by wooden buildings, a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and various other establishments necessary for frontier life. People hurried along the boardwalks, ducking the weather, occasionally glancing curiously at the wagon as it passed. Willow Creek's growing fast, Preston explained. The railroads brought all sorts of folks out here the past few years. Some stay, some don't. And which kind are you, Mr. Thorne? Penelope asked, finding herself curious despite her circumstances. The staying kind. He guided the horses around a muddy patch. My pa brought us here when I was 14. Built our ranch from nothing. When he passed 5 years back, my brother James and I took over. I'm sorry about your father. Preston nodded his acknowledgement. The boarding house is just ahead. My sister Abigail runs it. She's got a good heart but a sharp tongue, so don't take offense if she speaks her mind. The wagon stopped before a 2-story building with a broad porch and neatly painted sign. Willow Creek Boarding House. Preston hopped down and offered Penelope his hand. She accepted his help, noticing the calluses on his palm, evidence of honest work. Inside, warmth from a crackling fire immediately enveloped them. The front room served as a sitting area, with comfortable-looking chairs and a bookshelf in one corner. A petite woman with Preston's same blue eyes appeared from a back room, wiping her hands on an apron. Preston! I wasn't expecting you until... She stopped short upon seeing Penelope. Who's this? Abigail, this is Miss Penelope Foster. She was supposed to marry Harold Wilkins, but there's been a change of plans. She needs a place to stay. Understanding dawned in Abigail's eyes. That pompous fool. Come in, dear, you're soaked through. I can't pay, Penelope admitted immediately. Mr. Thorne offered your hospitality, but I should make it clear that I have no means at present. Abigail waved away her concerns. We'll discuss that later. For now, you need dry clothes and something hot in your stomach. She shot her brother a pointed look. Preston, make yourself useful and bring in more firewood. As Preston left to complete his task, Abigail led Penelope upstairs to a small but clean room. She provided a simple dress and undergarments that were slightly too short but dry and warm. These were mine before I filled out, Abigail explained. They'll do until we figure something more permanent. Dressed in the borrowed clothes with her wet hair combed and braided, Penelope felt more human when she descended to the dining room. Preston had returned and was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. He stood when she entered, his eyes briefly taking in her transformed appearance. Miss Foster, you look much improved. Thank you for your kindness, both of you, Penelope said, taking a seat at Abigail's invitation. I won't impose for long. If you could direct me to potential employment in town, I'm willing to work at anything respectable. Abigail placed a bowl of stew before her. Eat first, then we'll talk prospects. The stew was hearty and delicious, reminding Penelope how long it had been since she'd eaten properly. As she finished her meal, she became aware of the siblings exchanging meaningful glances. Have you ever worked as a teacher, Miss Foster? Preston finally asked. Penelope looked up in surprise. I taught at a girls' school in Boston for 3 years. It's one of the skills I mentioned in my letters to Mr. Wilkins. Willow Creek's schoolteacher, Mrs. Henderson, is leaving at the end of the month, Abigail explained. Her husband's taken work in Oregon. The town council's been searching for a replacement. Hope fluttered in Penelope's chest. Do you think they would consider me? Mayor Thompson chairs the council, Preston said. I'll speak with him tomorrow. Until then, you're welcome to stay here. I can work from my room and board, Penelope insisted. I won't be a burden. Abigail smiled. I could use help with the washing and cooking. 6 boarders keep me busy enough. Later that evening, after helping Abigail with the dinner dishes, Penelope stepped onto the back porch for a breath of air. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean beneath a rising moon. She was surprised to find Preston sitting on the steps, whittling a piece of wood. Mr. Thorne? I thought you'd return to your ranch. He glanced up. Planning to head back at first light. Sometimes I stay in town when business keeps me late. Penelope hesitated, then sat beside him, maintaining a proper distance. May I ask you something? You just did, he replied with a slight smile. But go ahead and ask another. Why are you helping me? You don't know anything about me. Preston considered the question, his knife pausing in its work. My ma came west as a mail-order bride. Pa sent for her after staking his claim. She arrived to find him living in a sod house with barely $2 to rub together. He resumed his whittling. But she stayed. Built a life with him. Taught me that a person's worth isn't measured by what's in their pockets. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was. His expression softened with memory. Died when Abigail was just 10. Childbirth fever. I'm sorry, Penelope said quietly. It was a long time ago. Preston examined his handiwork, a small wooden horse taking shape under his skilled hands. What about your family? Penelope stared into the darkness. My father was a university professor. We lived comfortably until the Panic of '73. He lost his position, and we lost our home. He found work as a clerk, but the pay was poor. When influenza took both my parents last winter, there were more debts than assets. So you decided to come west. It seemed like my only option, she admitted. Mr. Wilkins wrote such promising letters. He described his home, his standing in the community. He wanted an educated wife who could help with his business correspondence. She laughed bitterly. He failed to mention he was looking for a financial contribution as well. Harold Wilkins is a fool, Preston said firmly. He may be the wealthiest man in Willow Creek, but he's the poorest in understanding what truly matters. His words warmed something inside Penelope that had been cold for too long. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Preston, he corrected. If you're going to be staying in Willow Creek, we might as well use first names. Preston, she repeated, testing the familiarity. And you may call me Penelope. The following morning, Preston departed for his ranch with a promise to speak to Mayor Thompson about the teaching position. Penelope spent the day helping Abigail with the boarding house chores, grateful for the work that kept her hands busy and her mind from dwelling on her precarious situation. As she hung sheets to dry in the afternoon sunshine, Penelope spotted a wagon approaching. Preston sat at the reins beside an older man with a silver beard and spectacles. That's Mayor Thompson with my brother, Abigail said, appearing at Penelope's side. Good sign he's come himself instead of just sending a message. Penelope quickly smoothed her borrowed dress and checked that her hair was tidy. This could be her chance at independence, at building a life for herself in this frontier town. The men entered through the back gate, Preston tipping his hat to the women. Afternoon, ladies. Mayor Thompson wanted to meet Miss Foster right away. Miss Foster, the mayor said, extending his hand. Preston speaks highly of your qualifications. I understand you taught in Boston? Yes, sir. At the Hawthorne Academy for Young Ladies. I taught literature, mathematics, and natural philosophy. Mayor Thompson raised his eyebrows, clearly impressed. Well, our school is considerably more humble, just one room with about 20 children of varying ages. But we pride ourselves on providing a proper education. I would be honored to be considered for the position, Penelope said earnestly. The town council is meeting tonight. Would you be willing to appear before them? Answer some questions about your teaching philosophy? Penelope nodded eagerly. Of course. Good. 7 o'clock at the town hall. Mayor Thompson turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and the position includes a small house behind the schoolhouse. Nothing fancy, mind you, but private quarters for the teacher. After the mayor departed, Penelope could hardly contain her excitement. A house of my own! I never dared hope for such an opportunity so quickly. Preston smiled at her enthusiasm. Don't count your chickens just yet. The council will still want to interview you properly. I'll help you prepare, Abigail offered. And we need to make you look the part. First impressions matter with these town elders. That evening, wearing Abigail's best dress, hastily altered to fit her taller frame, and with her hair arranged in a respectable style, Penelope faced the town council. 5 men and 2 women sat at a long table in the town hall, regarding her with varying degrees of interest and skepticism. Mayor Thompson conducted the interview, asking about her educational background, teaching methods, and ability to maintain discipline in a classroom of mixed ages. Penelope answered confidently, drawing on her years of experience. "And why should we hire an outsider when there are local girls who could take the position?" asked Mrs. Hathaway, a stern-faced woman with tightly pinned gray hair. Penelope took a deep breath. "With respect, Mrs. Hathaway, I bring formal training and experience that might be difficult to find locally. Education shapes the future of your community. Don't your children deserve the best instruction available?" A murmur of approval ran through the council members. Even Mrs. Hathaway nodded grudgingly. "One final question, Miss Foster," Mayor Thompson said. "We understand you arrived in Willow Creek as a mail-order bride for Mr. Wilkins, who declined to honor the arrangement. Can we be assured you won't abandon your position if a more advantageous marriage prospect arises?" Penelope felt her cheeks flush, aware that Preston was watching from the back of the room. "Mr. Mayor, I came west seeking security and purpose. Teaching has always been my true calling. If you entrust me with Willow Creek's children, I will honor that responsibility with my full commitment." The council deliberated for less than 10 minutes before offering her the position. Penelope would begin the following Monday, giving her a week to prepare for her new role. The salary was modest but included the small house and provisions for winter fuel. As Penelope walked back to the boarding house with Preston and Abigail, her steps felt lighter than they had in months. "You were magnificent," Abigail declared. "Did you see Mrs. Hathaway's face when you talked about formal training? I thought she might actually smile." "Thank you both for your help," Penelope said. "I wouldn't have had this chance without you." Preston shrugged. "You earned it yourself." "I just made an introduction." Over the next few days, Penelope settled into life in Willow Creek. Abigail introduced her to other townspeople, and she began to feel less like an outsider. She met with Mrs. Henderson to discuss the curriculum and visited her soon-to-be home, a snug one-room cabin with a small kitchen, bedroom area, and sitting space with bookshelves. On Saturday, Preston arrived at the boarding house with his wagon. "I thought you might want to move your things to the teacher's house," he offered. "And we could stop by the general store for any supplies you need." "That's very thoughtful," Penelope said. "But I don't have much to move." Her meager possessions now included 2 dresses Abigail had given her and a few personal items purchased with an advance on her teaching salary. "Well, neighbors tend to help new arrivals get settled," Preston explained. "Abigail's sending over some kitchen items, and I brought a few things from the ranch." At the teacher's house, Penelope discovered that a few things included a handmade rocking chair, a colorful quilt, and a small writing desk. "Preston, this is too much," she protested, running her hand over the smooth wood of the desk. "The chair and quilt were my mother's," he said. "Been gathering dust in our attic. The desk I made last winter when there wasn't much ranch work to be done." "You made this?" Penelope examined the desk's dovetail joints and carved edges with new appreciation. "I like working with my hands." Preston seemed almost embarrassed by her admiration. "My brother James says I should have been a carpenter instead of a rancher." They spent the afternoon arranging furniture and organizing the small space. Preston hung shelves, fixed a loose floorboard, and showed Penelope how to operate the cast iron stove. "You'll want to keep plenty of wood split before the snow comes," he advised. "Winters get mighty cold here." "I'll remember that." Penelope placed her few books on the shelf, trying to make the space look less empty. "Thank you for everything today. I feel almost prepared for Monday now." "Almost?" Preston raised an eyebrow. Penelope smiled ruefully. "I'm a bit nervous about meeting all the children and their parents. In Boston, I knew what to expect. Here, everything is new." "Folks are just folks, wherever you go," Preston said simply. "These children need learning, same as any others. You know how to provide that." His confidence in her abilities was reassuring. As they stood in the center of what was now her home, Penelope realized how quickly her fortunes had changed. Just days ago, she'd been abandoned and destitute on the train platform. Now she had a position, a home, and perhaps even friends. "Would you stay for tea?" she asked impulsively. "I should practice being a proper hostess before I start receiving parents." Preston hesitated. "I should get back to the ranch before dark." "Of course," Penelope said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Another time, perhaps." He nodded, reaching for his hat. At the door, he turned back. "There's a social at the church next Saturday. Sort of a harvest celebration. Might be a good way for you to meet more of the community." "Is that an invitation, Mr. Thorne?" Penelope asked with a small smile. "I reckon it is," he replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'll come by around 6 if that suits you." After he left, Penelope stood in her doorway watching his wagon disappear down the road. A warm feeling settled in her chest that had nothing to do with the autumn sunshine. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt a sense of possibility about her future. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and Penelope's stomach in knots. She dressed carefully in her most professional attire and arrived at the schoolhouse an hour early to prepare. Parents began arriving with their children shortly before 9, each family introducing themselves and sizing up the new teacher. To Penelope's relief, the children seemed eager and respectful, if naturally curious about their new instructor. By midday, she'd learned all 23 names and begun to assess their various educational levels. The youngest student, 6-year-old Timothy Baker, approached her desk during the lunch break. "Miss Foster, my pa says you came to marry Mr. Wilkins, but he didn't want you 'cause you're too poor." A hush fell over the classroom as the other children awaited her response. Penelope knelt to Timothy's level, aware that her handling of this moment would set the tone for her authority. "Your father is partly correct, Timothy. I did come to Willow Creek expecting to marry Mr. Wilkins, but God had other plans for me. Now I have the privilege of being your teacher instead, which I think is a much better arrangement. Don't you?" Timothy considered this seriously before nodding. "Mr. Wilkins smells like pickles anyway." The tension broken, the children laughed, and Penelope smoothly redirected them to their afternoon lessons. By the time she rang the dismissal bell, she felt she'd established herself as both kind and firm, the balance essential for effective teaching. As the days passed, Penelope fell into a comfortable routine. She taught during the day, prepared lessons in the evenings, and gradually made her small house into a home. Several families invited her to dinner, eager to impress the new teacher, and she began to understand the social dynamics of Willow Creek. She saw Preston occasionally in town, exchanging friendly greetings, but he seemed busy with ranch work. As Saturday approached, she found herself looking forward to the church social with surprising anticipation. When Preston arrived to escort her, Penelope was ready in her best dress, a deep blue that Abigail had helped her remake from one of Mrs. Henderson's cast-offs. "You look mighty fine, Penelope," Preston said, his usual confidence seemingly shaken as he stood on her doorstep. "Thank you." She noticed he trimmed his beard and wore a clean shirt with his best vest. "You're looking quite presentable yourself." The church was decorated with autumn flowers and harvest bounty when they arrived. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and a small group of musicians tuned their instruments in a corner. Nearly everyone in Willow Creek appeared to be in attendance. "Miss Foster!" Several of her students rushed to greet her, proudly introducing their parents and siblings. "I see you've made quite an impression," Preston observed as they moved through the crowd. "The children are wonderful," Penelope said warmly. "So eager to learn. I've already requested more advanced books for some of the older students. Preston Thorne, you've been holding out on us." A tall man who resembled Preston clapped him on the shoulder. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your lady friend?" "Penelope, this is my brother James," Preston said, looking slightly uncomfortable. "James, this is Miss Penelope Foster, Willow Creek's new schoolteacher." "A pleasure, madam." James shook her hand vigorously. "My brother mentioned he'd helped you get settled, but he failed to mention how pretty you are." James, Preston warned. What? I'm just being friendly. James winked at Penelope. Save me a dance later, Miss Foster. As James moved away to greet others, Preston shook his head. Sorry about that. My brother's never met a stranger. He seems charming, Penelope said diplomatically. You two don't look much alike. He takes after our father. I favor my mother's side. Preston guided her toward the refreshment table. Would you like some punch? As the evening progressed, Penelope danced with several partners, including Mayor Thompson, Dr. Collins, and as promised, the ebullient James Thorne. But it was the two dances with Preston she enjoyed most, despite his admission that he had two left feet when it comes to dancing. You move well enough for a cowboy, she teased as they circled the floor. Had a good teacher, he replied. My mother insisted all her children learn proper social graces, even way out here on the frontier. When the music slowed, Preston's hand at her waist felt warm and steady. Penelope was acutely aware of their proximity, of the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. People are watching us, she murmured, noticing several curious glances. Small towns run on gossip, Preston said. Give them something to talk about, and they'll leave someone else alone. And what are they saying about us, do you think? His blue eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. That I'm sweet on the new schoolteacher, I expect. Penelope's heart fluttered. And are you? Sweet on me? Before Preston could answer, Mayor Thompson approached, interrupting their dance. Miss Foster, I wanted to introduce you to Reverend Phillips. He's very interested in your ideas about adding more literature to our school curriculum. The moment broken, Penelope allowed herself to be drawn away. For the remainder of the evening, she and Preston were rarely together, each pulled into different conversations. When he finally escorted her home, the night had turned cool, with stars scattered across the clear sky. I enjoyed this evening, Penelope said as they reached her door. Thank you for inviting me. My pleasure. Preston stood with his hat in his hands, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. About what you asked earlier. You don't need to answer that. Penelope interrupted, suddenly afraid of what he might say. It was presumptuous of me. No, it wasn't. Preston took a step closer. The truth is, I find myself thinking about you more than I probably should. But I'm not sure what a cultured Boston lady would want with a rough rancher like me. Penelope's breath caught. I'm not a Boston lady anymore, Preston. I'm just a schoolteacher trying to build a new life. You're a great deal more than just anything, he said softly. In the moonlight, his face was half in shadow, but she could see the sincerity in his eyes. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, but instead, he took her hand and pressed it gently. Good night, Penelope. I'll see you at church tomorrow. As autumn deepened toward winter, Penelope's life in Willow Creek fell into a pleasant rhythm. Her students were progressing well, and she'd begun offering evening classes for adults who wished to improve their reading and arithmetic. She'd made friends among the townspeople and felt increasingly at home in the small community. Her friendship with Preston developed gradually. He often found reasons to visit town, stopping by the schoolhouse with fresh apples from his orchard or offering to fix a loose shutter on her house. They took Sunday afternoon walks when weather permitted, discussing books, sharing stories of their pasts, and talking about their hopes for the future. Have you ever thought about returning to Boston? Preston asked one crisp November day as they strolled along the creek that gave the town its name. Penelope considered the question. Not seriously. There's nothing for me there anymore. My life is here now. She glanced at him. What about you? Have you ever thought about leaving Willow Creek? Once, he admitted. After my father died. James and I argued about how to run the ranch. I thought about selling my share and heading to California. He picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the water. But this land is in my blood now. I can't imagine being anywhere else. As they walked back toward town, their hands brushed accidentally. Preston hesitated, then took her hand in his. Penelope felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the woolen shawl around her shoulders. "People will talk," she said, though she made no move to pull away. "Let them," Preston replied. "I'm not ashamed of how I feel about you." The first snow came in early December, transforming Willow Creek into a winter wonderland. Penelope canceled school for the day when the blizzard made travel unsafe. She was surprised to hear a knock at her door mid-morning. Preston stood on her porch, snow dusting his hat and shoulders. "Thought I'd check on you," he explained. "Make sure you had enough firewood." "That's very thoughtful," Penelope said, inviting him in. "But surely you didn't ride all the way from your ranch in this weather?" "I stayed in town last night," he explained, stomping snow from his boots. "Good thing, too. The road to the ranch is likely impassable now." Penelope made coffee while Preston built up her fire. There was a comfortable domesticity to the scene that made her heart ache with longing. She'd come to care deeply for this quiet, steadfast man who had shown her nothing but kindness since her arrival. "I brought something for you," Preston said, reaching into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "An early Christmas gift." Penelope unwrapped it carefully to find a beautifully carved wooden box. The lid featured an intricate design of wildflowers and a small bird in flight. "Preston, it's exquisite," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Open it," he urged. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a silver brooch in the shape of a quill pen. Simple but elegant, it gleamed in the firelight. "I notice you don't have much jewelry," Preston explained. "Thought a schoolteacher ought to have something pretty to wear." Touched beyond words, Penelope pinned it to her dress with trembling fingers. "It's perfect." "Thank you." Preston watched her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "There's something I need to say, Penelope." "Yes?" she whispered, hardly daring to hope. "I've grown mighty fond of you these past months. More than fond, if I'm being honest." He took her hands in his. "I know you came here expecting to be Harold Wilkins' wife, and ended up having to make your own way instead. I admire how you've done that. You're the strongest, most determined woman I've ever known." Penelope felt tears pricking at her eyes. "Preston, let me finish before I lose my nerve," he said with a small smile. "I'm not a wealthy man like Wilkins. The ranch does well enough, but will never be rich in terms of money. What I can offer you is a life built on hard work, mutual respect, and a whole lot of love." He took a deep breath. "I guess what I'm trying to say is, I love you, Penelope Foster. If you could see your way clear to becoming Penelope Thorne someday, you'd make me the happiest man in Montana Territory." Joy bubbled up inside her like a spring. "Are you proposing to me, Preston Thorne?" "I reckon I am," he said, looking both terrified and hopeful. "Not very eloquently, I'm afraid." "It was perfectly eloquent," Penelope assured him, tears now flowing freely. "And yes, I would very much like to become Penelope Thorne someday." Preston's face broke into a radiant smile. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her with such tenderness that Penelope felt her heart might burst with happiness. When they finally parted, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have a fancy ring to give you yet." "I don't need one," Penelope said truthfully. "When I came west, I thought security meant marrying a man of means. But I've learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's found in community, purpose, and love." She touched his face gently. "And by that measure, Preston Thorne, I believe I'm the richest woman in Montana." News of their engagement spread quickly through Willow Creek. Most reactions were positive, though Harold Wilkins made a point of snubbing them both when they encountered him at the general store. "Seems he's reconsidered your worth now that you're spoken for," Preston observed wryly as they watched Wilkins stalk away. "His loss is my gain," Penelope replied, squeezing Preston's hand. The school board granted Penelope permission to continue teaching until the end of the school year, though they made it clear they expected her to resign once she was married. While she regretted having to give up her position, Penelope understood the community's expectation that a married woman's primary responsibility was to her home and family. "Perhaps I could tutor students at the ranch," she suggested to Preston as they discussed their future. "I don't want to abandon teaching entirely." "I think that's a fine idea," Preston agreed. "The ranch house has plenty of room. We could set aside a space for lessons." They planned a spring wedding, giving them time to prepare properly. James heartily approved of the match, teasing that it was about time Preston found himself a woman smart enough to keep him in line. Abigail was equally delighted. "I've considered you family since the day Preston brought you to my door," she told Penelope. "Now it will just be official." As winter gave way to spring, Penelope divided her time between teaching and preparing for her new life as Preston's wife. She sewed linens for their home, learned to cook the hearty meals ranchers preferred, and visited the Circle T whenever possible to familiarize herself with what would soon be her home. The ranch was larger than she'd imagined, over 500 acres of rolling grassland and forest, with a sturdy 2-story house built by Preston's father. A barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings completed the property, which supported both cattle and horses. "Pa always believed in diversifying," Preston explained as he showed her around. "The cattle are our main business, but we also raise and train horses. James has an eye for good horse flesh." Penelope was impressed by the efficient operation of the ranch, and the respect the handful of ranch hands showed Preston and his brother. It was clear they ran their business with integrity and fairness. In late April, just as wildflowers began carpeting the meadows around Willow Creek, Penelope and Preston were married in the small church where they danced at the harvest social. She wore a cream-colored dress that Abigail and several other women from town had helped her make, adorned with lace sent by one of her former colleagues from Boston. Preston, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in his best suit, watched her walk down the aisle with wonder in his eyes. When Reverend Phillips pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed her with such devotion that several older ladies in the congregation murmured their approval. The entire town turned out for the celebration afterward, held in the town square under budding trees. There was music, dancing, and enough food to feed an army. Even Harold Wilkins made an appearance, offering a stiff congratulation before departing early. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the festivities, Preston pulled Penelope aside. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, testing out her new name, "are you ready to go home?" The word home had never sounded so sweet. "Yes," she replied, her heart full. "I'm ready." They left amid a shower of rice and good wishes, traveling the 5 miles to the Circle T in a wagon decorated with ribbons and flowers by Preston's ranch hands. James had promised to stay in town that night, giving the newlyweds privacy for their first evening as husband and wife. When they reached the ranch, Preston surprised Penelope by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home," he said, setting her down gently in the front hall. Penelope looked around at what was now her home, the comfortable furnishings, the photographs of Preston's family on the walls, the bookshelves filled with volumes both practical and literary. It was nothing like the grand house she'd imagined when corresponding with Harold Wilkins, but it was infinitely more precious. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to embrace her husband. Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Preston traced gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. "Happy?" he asked softly. Penelope nestled closer to him, marveling at how right it felt to be in his arms. "Completely." "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible." He kissed her forehead. "When you stepped off that train last fall, soaking wet and looking like you might blow away in the next strong wind, I never imagined you'd become the center of my world." "God works in mysterious ways," Penelope murmured. "I thought my life was over when Harold Wilkins rejected me. Instead, it was just beginning." The days and weeks that followed were filled with adjustments as Penelope adapted to life as a rancher's wife. There was much to learn, from managing the household accounts to preparing meals for hungry ranch hands to understanding the rhythms of ranch life. She completed the school year as promised, saying an emotional goodbye to her students on the last day of May. Several parents expressed their gratitude for her dedication, and the school board presented her with a leather-bound volume of Shakespeare's works as a parting gift. Summer brought long days of hard work for everyone at the Circle T. Penelope threw herself into her new role, determined to be a true partner to Preston in all aspects of their life together. She learned to ride better, to garden in the challenging Montana climate, and to make decisions about household matters that affected not just her and Preston but also the men who worked for them. Preston, for his part, never treated her as less than his equal. He sought her opinion on ranch business, taught her about cattle and horses with endless patience, and proudly introduced her as my wife and partner whenever they encountered neighbors or business associates. Their love deepened with each passing day. The physical passion they discovered on their wedding night blossomed into a deeper intimacy as they learned each other's strengths, weaknesses, and dreams. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Penelope took Preston's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "I have news," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "Dr. Collins confirmed it today. We're going to have a baby next spring." Preston's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to pure joy in the span of seconds. "A baby? We're having a baby?" He gathered her into his arms, laughing and crying at once. "Oh, Penelope, that's wonderful news." As Preston peppered her face with kisses, Penelope reflected on how drastically her life had changed in less than a year. From destitute and rejected on a train platform to beloved wife and soon-to-be mother, her journey had been nothing like she'd expected when she left Boston. Word of Penelope's pregnancy spread quickly through Willow Creek. Gifts began arriving at the ranch: baby blankets, tiny clothes, advice both solicited and unsolicited. Abigail was ecstatic at the prospect of becoming an aunt, while James teased that the baby would surely inherit Preston's stubborn streak and Penelope's brains, which seems a fair trade. As autumn returned to Montana, bringing with it the anniversary of Penelope's arrival, Preston surprised her one morning with a picnic basket and a plan. "I've arranged for James and the hands to handle things today," he explained. "I thought we might ride up to the North Ridge. There's something I want to show you." The ride took them through golden aspen groves and pine forests to a ridge overlooking the entire ranch. From this vantage point, Penelope could see the house, barn, and outbuildings, the cattle grazing in distant pastures, and the ribbon of creek that wound through the property. "It's breathtaking," she said, one hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her abdomen. Preston spread a blanket on a flat rock and helped her sit comfortably before unpacking their lunch. "My father brought my mother up here when they were expecting their first child, my brother. It's a family tradition of sorts." Penelope smiled, touched by the sentiment. "I like becoming part of your family traditions. I thought we might start a few of our own, too." Preston reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small wooden chest, similar to the box he'd given her last Christmas but larger. "This is for our child and any others who might come along." Inside the chest were several items: a small handmade quilt, a wooden toy horse, a silver cup, and a leather-bound journal. "The quilt was mine when I was a baby," Preston explained. "The horse I carved while waiting for you to finish school each day last winter, when I was working up the courage to court you properly. The cup was my grandfather's." He hesitated. "The journal is for you to write in your thoughts, hopes for our child, stories of our life together." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes. "It's a beautiful gift, Preston. Our child will treasure it someday." They ate their picnic as clouds drifted lazily overhead, talking about names for the baby and plans for the future. Preston spoke of expanding the ranch, perhaps adding more cropland to supplement the livestock operation. Penelope shared her idea of starting a small lending library for ranch families who lived too far from town to access books regularly. As they prepared to return home, Preston helped Penelope to her feet and held her close. "1 year ago today, you arrived in Willow Creek with nothing but the clothes on your back and a heart full of determination. And look at me now," she said, gazing up at him with love. I have everything I never knew I wanted. Preston kissed her tenderly. Harold Wilkins thought you were too poor to be his wife. What a fool he was. You've brought more richness to my life than all the gold in Montana. Love is the greatest wealth. Penelope agreed, remembering how Preston had once told her that a person's worth wasn't measured by what was in their pockets. And by that measure, my darling husband, we are truly the richest people in the territory. Hand in hand, they rode back down the ridge toward home, toward their future, certain that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together with love as their greatest treasure. In the years that followed, the Circle T Ranch prospered under Preston and Penelope's stewardship. Their first child, a daughter they named Margaret after Preston's mother, arrived on a bright spring morning, followed 2 years later by a son they called William after Penelope's father. True to her word, Penelope established a small school on the ranch, teaching not only her own children but also those of neighboring ranchers and the ranch hands. Her lending library grew to fill an entire room of the house, becoming a gathering place for the community during the long winter months. Preston continued to expand the ranch operations, applying innovative techniques he learned from agricultural journals Penelope ordered from back east. The Circle T gained a reputation for quality stock and fair business practices throughout the territory. Harold Wilkins eventually left Willow Creek for San Francisco, having lost much of his fortune in a failed mining venture. When Penelope heard the news, she felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only gratitude for the twist of fate that had led her to Preston instead. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat surrounded by their children, extended family, and friends who had gathered to celebrate, Preston raised his glass in a toast. "To my beautiful wife," he said, his eyes still holding the same love and admiration they had a decade earlier. "Who taught me that the truest riches can't be counted in dollars or acres, but in love, family, and community. I am wealthy beyond measure because of you, Penelope." As glasses clinked around the table, Penelope squeezed Preston's hand, her heart full. From mail-order bride rejected for being too poor, she had become the matriarch of a thriving ranch and the heart of a loving family. It was a journey she could never have imagined when she stepped off that train in the rain, but one she would never trade for all the gold in the world. For in Preston's arms, in the home they had built together, in the children they were raising, and in the love they shared, Penelope had found the greatest wealth of all, a life rich in purpose, respect, and love that would endure long after material fortunes had faded to dust.